Good afternoon, students. So now you're in week 9 of this class, and all you have to do for this week is you just have to do your week 9 persuasive post for the week 9 forum. And so you're going to be writing a persuasive essay post. And when you write a persuasive essay post, that's when you want to convince the other person of your point of view and that your point of view is the correct point of view. And so in a persuasive essay post, you can use the 5-paragraph essay structure in which you have your thesis statement, in which you have the topic, opinion, reasons, TOR, that's the thesis formula. And then you have your 3 supporting paragraphs that relate back to your thesis. And then you have your conclusion. And when you have a persuasive essay, there are 3 different kinds of persuasive essays that I'm going to cover in this presentation. I'm also going to cover what are the elements of what makes a good persuasive essay and how to write a good persuasive essay. And so far as I'm looking into your forums, into the week 9 forum, most of you have written really good persuasive essays, but you're making mistakes in your APA. So remember that whenever you cite percentages, numbers, statistics, historical facts, medical facts, and uncommon knowledge, you have to cite the source right after the quotation. If you have a direct quote, you need quotation marks, and then you need to have the author's name, the date, and the page number right after the citation. Then at the end of your paper, you would write your reference citation. That's when you write the entire reference where you have the author's name, the date, the article name, the publication name, date of publication, date that you retrieved the website, then you write the website address. And so a very common mistake in the week 9 forum that I'm seeing so far is that people just put in the web address in the sources, and that's not enough. And so you're missing parts of your essay. And when you do your week 10, that's next week, credible sources worksheet, you are going to be doing a direct quote, a paraphrase quote, and a reference quote. And you're going to have to be able to understand the difference between a direct quote, a paraphrase quote, and a reference citation. And I'm going to give it to you in about 2 minutes, and then I'm going to go over next week's. So if you don't understand APA, then I seriously recommend that you attend my week 10 lecture, where I'm just going to talk about APA. And then I'm going to talk about how to evaluate credible sources. So for this week's, so I'm going to go back to this week's topic, which is about persuasive essay. So when you write a persuasive essay, when you cite a medical fact, a statistic, you have to cite the source. And if you cite the source word per word from the source, then you need quotation marks, and you need to cite the author's name, the date, and then the page number. And even if you put the quotation in your own words, you have to cite the source. So if you have a paraphrase quote, you don't need quotation marks and you don't need page numbers. You just need the author and the date. The reason why we use APA and why APA is so important is so that you give credit to the researcher and you avoid plagiarism. So that's going to be next week's, and you also have to know how to find a credible source. So next week's lecture is very, very important, and therefore I very seriously recommend that you attend that lecture. So for this lecture, I'm going to start my presentation on what is a persuasive essay and the 3 kinds of persuasive essays. So I will share my screen and we will start the presentation. And so here I will set up the slideshow from the beginning. So what is a persuasive essay? So here are some week 9 forum mistakes. And so when to use APA? So when you write your persuasive essay and you use number information, statistic, percentages, dollar and cents, dates, historical information, medical information, financial information, or uncommon knowledge, you need to cite the source. You need to use APA, and you need to put in the author and the date and the page number. So when you write your persuasive essay post, make sure you have 5 full paragraphs for a fully developed essay. Place your thesis statement as the last sentence of the first paragraph. Your thesis needs to include 3 reasons, which become your body paragraphs. Use APA in-text citation at least 1 time per paragraph to make your post more credible. Make sure your reference citation is not missing any parts. Peer review each other's papers to reinforce your knowledge of the 5-paragraph essay structure. Avoid simply agreeing or disagreeing with somebody's topic. Post to each other reading questions to reinforce reading lessons. So if you read the book, our Langan book, and you have interesting questions you want to post to other students, you can do so in the Week 9 forum. You can ask each other, so Jan, what was your favorite part of the Week 9 reading? And then Jan would say, well, when I was doing the Week 9 reading, my favorite part was when they discussed XYZ. So that you can also discuss your weekly reading in the forums, in addition to doing peer review. Make sure each in-text citation is less than 3 lines. If your in-text citation is more than 3 lines, then you need to make a block citation. Here are some examples of percentages. So if you're going to use percentages, you need to put in the author's name, the date, and the page number. Here's an example of a direct quote. So when you're, so about 51% of students who couldn't finance school dropped out, and 79% of those struggling delayed graduation date. Rising college costs are forcing many students to drop out. And then here you use percentages and dates. So you have to cite the source, Smith 2020-22. Here's another percentage example. In Tennessee, its applications for student loans decreased by 17% in the first year of its school program, with the loan amounts decreasing by 12%. At that very same time, FAFSA applications increased with 40% of the entire nation. The increase in applications originating in that state in the first year of their program. And so here you have, once again, percentages. So you need to cite the source. 1 in 3 households are affected by addiction. America has the highest number of overdoses in this epidemic. So here you have both a number and you have a medical information. Then you have to cite the source. Here's another percentages. 81% of teenagers are on social media. Then you have to cite the source. Use APA for any time you cite any kind of number. Dreamers play a big part in the work industry. Because of the Dreamers Act, 1 million young children received a work permit. And so here you have to, because you're using numbers like 1 million, you need to cite the source. A Credit Karma survey found 63% of people believe financial literacy should be part of the school's curriculum. You've got to cite the source. Here you have 41%, 37%, 12%, and you've got to cite the source. And here, even if you're talking about time, 20 minutes, you need to cite the source. So more examples of medical information. Alcohol releases endorphins, which is the body's natural painkiller and is associated with pleasure and reward. Alcohol turns a portion of the brain, which is the reason why it is called a depression. It slows down bodily functions like the heart rate and the person's breathing, along with impairment of cognitive function. You notice that this is a really long in-text citation, and I tell students that your in-text citation should not be just 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, and then you should paraphrase the rest. Okay, so keep it short so that it can be flowing with the rest of your paper. So notice so that when you have medical information, you have to cite the source. Dopamine is known as the feel-good drug. This drug or hormone is released in our brains and makes us very happy, or otherwise it makes us feel good. Dopamine is released when we do something we enjoy, eat food, interact with each other, as well as when we go on social media. And so here you have a medical fact, you need to cite the source. So these quotes are too long. Each quote should only have 3 lines. So these quotes need to be put into its own block citation. A block citation is that you indent another paragraph into your paragraph. And instead of using double space, you single space it. And that would be a block quotation. So here, when you have historical information, you need to cite the source. Secondly, freedom of speech has given a voice to those once looked down upon by society, persons such as Blacks and the LGBTQ community. There was a time in history when these people were silenced, and what they saw was not seen as relevant. Freedom of speech is what allowed great individuals like Nelson Mandela and Marcus Garvey to speak. And then you have to cite historical information. Then you have to also cite more numbers, like even if you're citing numbers like dollars and cents, $8.80, $17,600. Average monthly rent is $900. You have to cite the source. And then if you have 200 prostitutes spend on average $200 a week just to keep their appearance, so that you have to have also, you have to cite the source. Did you know it is legal in all 50 states to carry a concealed handgun? Some states require a person to obtain a permit while others do not. However, in the state of Florida, you must obtain a license. So here you have legal information, you have to cite the source. And then you have to use APA for dates. In 2018, a man opened fire at a back-to-school event in Titusville, Florida, where over 100 children and adults were attending. And so here you have more dates, like in 2018, and you need to cite the source. And here, when you have abbreviations, write out the abbreviations the first time you use it. And here's some more APA for medical information. 80% of jobs in 2011 require little to no physical activity. And then you have obesity, in most cases, is preventable. It is caused from a lack of exercise and from overeating, even if it were passed down through genetics. So here you have another example of medical information. Also, do not overwhelm the reader with too many statistics. So here is an example of someone who overwhelmed the reader with one statistic after another statistic after another statistic. Use only one in-text citation at a time. So here is another example of somebody who used too many citations at the same time. And so here you have a poll conducted in May of 2020 shows that 77% of individuals identified as having religious affiliations. Religious-based protesters argue that abortions are immoral, or as Pope John II said, the direct killing of innocent human beings. A study done in 2014 showed that 62% of patients who had an abortion performed were affiliated with a specific religion, while only 38% identified as no religious affiliation. And so here you have too many statistics at a time. And so here you stick to using one percentage statistic and one in-text citation per paragraph so as not to overwhelm the reader. A better citation would be 70% of individuals identified as having religious affiliations while having an abortion. So here you have Smith, 2020, page 22. When you write a reference citation, many of you simply write a web address, and then you're missing the person's last name, the date, you're missing the article name, the journal name, date that you retrieved the website. And so you need to include an entire reference citation at the end of your post. So those were the most common week 9 forum mistakes from previous classes. And so now I'm going to go over what is a persuasive essay. How do you get your way? After learning how to persuade people using ethos, pathos, and logos, I will now teach you how to build an effective argument, avoid fallacies, gather credible evidence, and introduce to you 3 kinds of persuasive essays. After this presentation, you will learn the important art of argumentation, and you will now be able to get your way. Getting your way, how to be persuasive. Persuasive writing occurs everywhere you look, from billboards selling you the latest drink or movie, to TV ads selling you the latest medicines to cure anything from headaches to acne, to and when you write emails at work to keep customers coming back, or when you ask for a raise, promotion, or you want your teenager to come home on time. That's all you're trying to convince people your way. And so in daily life, we use persuasive essay, we use persuasive speech all the time. And persuasive speech surrounds us everywhere we go. Persuasive argumented writing can also be used to address social justice issues, to encourage people to take action against the injustices in society by persuading people to care so much about injustice or your cause that they will take action or even pass a law to solve the problem. Therefore, being able to persuade is an important skill to have. Advocacy writing is a form of persuasive writing as a nurse that you can do. So as a nurse, you can write articles about medical issues, and using your expertise as a nurse, you will have greater credibility with the reader. So you can write about healthcare causes such as Medicare for all, getting people to wear masks during a pandemic to prevent overwhelming hospitals. You can advocate for certain treatments that you have found effective for your patients. You can advise people on how to stay healthy and fit, or you can advise people on what a healthy diet is. Right now, you can advise people how important it is to get vaccinated against COVID-19 or to get a booster. You can write articles about better treatments for patients. You can advise new nurses on better practices for new nurses to follow. As a nurse, you can write advocacy articles to other nurses. For example, nursesjournal.org is a journal where nurses write articles for other nurses. In teaching where I work, we have teacher mentors who mentor younger teachers to prevent teacher burnout. And these mentors would then write their teaching best practice articles in teaching journals. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the different aspects of how you can write a really good persuasive essay. And so I'm going to go over the steps in building a good argumentative essay, engaging the other side, ethos, pathos, and logos, position paper. So, and then the 3 kinds of persuasive essays. Position paper is the first kind and the most common kind of persuasive essay, call to action, and problem solution paper. And as you've seen, as you will see, problem solution paper is used a lot in business proposals and in research proposals, as in science papers. So different kinds of claims in good argumentation. So when you write a persuasive essay claim or a thesis statement, you have to identify your audience and purpose, generate ideas, and gather solid evidence. develop a line of reasoning, draw reasonable conclusions from your research, support each claim with solid evidence to avoid fallacies, make concessions, and develop rebuttals. This means that your essay should be about one central idea, just like when we were writing essay 1. So always write about one central idea and then use your body paragraphs to support that idea. And so your thesis statement or your argument should be clearly defendable, responsible, understandable, debatable, and interesting. A claim or thesis is a conclusion drawn from a logical thought and reliable evidence. A fact is a statement that can be checked for accuracy. An opinion is a personally held taste or attitude. So when you write your essays, you want to base your essays on fact, not on opinion. And so if you simply write on opinion, you could just make it up off the top of your head. Whereas if you write it based on facts, facts can be double checked for accuracy. So fact, The Lord of the Rings was written by Tolkien. That's something you can double check. Opinion, The Lord of the Rings was my favorite movie series of all times. How are you going to look that up? You see, so when you have an opinion, that is not a fact. But as long as you back up your opinion with facts, that makes your essay credible. There are 3 kinds of thesis statements and 3 kinds of claims. You have claim of truth, where you claim that something is or is not the case. As a writer, you want the reader to accept your claim as trustworthy. So a claim of truth would be climate change is a hoax because, or climate change is not a hoax because, or that the North Pole is located in a very cold region of the earth up north, and the South Pole is located in the very southern part of the earth, also very cold. So that is a claim of truth, or the fact that I'm Chinese American, that's a claim of truth, okay? A claim of value states that something does or does not have worth. Is it worth it to get a college education? Is it worth it? It is not worth getting a college education because. So if you start your thesis statement with, it is not worth getting a college education because, then that is a claim of value. But the most common kind of thesis statement that I see in the week 9 forums is claim of policy. A claim of policy states that something ought or not ought to be done. Should we or should we not have gun control? Gun control is or is not necessary. So when you look at the procon.org website, most of them are claim of policy thesis statements. In other words, what kind of policy should we have? Then if you go look under ethics in the procon.org website, then you see a lot of claim of value thesis statements. Like, is it ethical that we mandate people to take a vaccine? Is it ethical? Any question that, any research question that starts with, is it ethical, is a claim of value. So those are the 3 kinds of thesis statements you should keep in mind: claim of truth, claim of value, and claim of policy. Here is an example of claim of truth. The Arctic ice cap will begin to disappear by 2050. In 12 years, if we cannot control climate, we will destroy our environment. The cholesterol in eggs is not as dangerous as previously stated. Women are just as smart and capable as men. Avoid statements that are obviously true or impossible to support or research. A claim of value puts values and standards to a claim of value. So claim of value states that something does or does not have worth. So here are some examples of claims of value. Volunteer tutoring provides a valuable service to at-risk youth. Many music videos fail to present positive images of women. Asian Americans are underrepresented in TV and movies. Claims of value must be supported by reference to a known standard, not your feelings. And so another claim of value is, can money buy happiness? So that is a claim of value. And so if you were like, Asian Americans are underrepresented in social media, TV, and movies. So that's a claim of value because you are comparing that known to a known standard. And that known standard, at least in movies, is that most movies are represented by European Americans and not much of others. Okay, so that's the known standards. So that's examples of claims of value. Claims of policy states that something ought or not ought to be done. And as I stated before, claims of policy are the most common claims in the procon.org website. Special taxes should be placed on gas-guzzling SUVs. These are examples of claims of policy. Marijuana should be legalized in all 50 states. The George Floyd bill needs to be passed for police reform. Roe versus Wade should be made the law of the land in the Supreme Court. Claims of policy focus on action. An argument over policy may involve claims of truth and claims of value. So when you have claims of policy, that also can involve a claim of truth as well as a claim of value all together. Avoid all or nothing extreme claims, such as all Chinese people are good at math. All or nothing claims result in fallacies and stereotypes. Make a truly meaningful claim. Use qualifiers or reasons to justify or temper your claim. Avoid unclear, fuzzy language. Avoid ambiguity. Make sure your information relates back to your thesis. Avoid using slanted language. That is choosing words with strong positive or negative connotation, which will draw the reader away from the logic of your argument. Avoid using slang or text language in an academic paper. That is a common mistake that I see in your essays, is people using too much slang in their essays. And you would say, one person said, let's all discuss this. Let us all see what this is, and stuff like that. So avoid using text language. So when you write an academic paper, you want to use a professional academic tone. That means that you avoid using you and your, because if we use you and your, which is second person case, that means you're talking directly to the reader. That makes your tone too conversational. So for academic writing, you want your tone to be third person case, because when we write an academic paper, we're researching about other people. We're writing about other people. It's a secondary source. And so when we write about other people, we use third person case, he, she, they. And so instead of saying you should stay fit, you would say a person should stay fit. Americans should stay fit. Everybody should stay fit. And so we avoid using you and your by replacing you and your with a person or with people or with a noun subject. So I made a PowerPoint about this, and so you can ask me about it. And it's also in your forums. And if you have trouble replacing you and your, you can always email me and I can give you some pointers. Now, make valid claims to avoid fallacies. So in order to avoid fallacies, you have to make sure that your persuasive post has ethos. That means that all of the sources that you used were written by experts. Use pathos. You make the article interesting by using descriptive language that gives the reader a mental picture of the event. In other words, an appeal to emotion. So pathos is what we did in our week 3 forum when we practiced doing the food game and we practiced how to write descriptive language. So that's pathos. Logos. Have a thesis statement with matching body paragraphs. That's appeal to logic. And so you need to have all 3 of them, ethos, pathos, and logos in your argument in order to have a valid argument. If you're missing any one of these, ethos, pathos, or logos, then your argument becomes a fallacy. And a fallacy is an illogical argument. So let's say I'm missing ethos. In other words, I write a paper, but I use sources from Wikipedia, and I use sources that are not written by experts. Then your paper is not credible. So that means you're missing ethos. And if I write a paper that talks about everything at the same time and has no logical structure, then your paper is not credible if you're missing logos. So if you only write a paper based on pathos, just based on emotion, if you look back on the 2016 election and you see that both candidates, Hillary Clinton and Trump, made fun of each other, and then voters had to decide which candidate to vote for based on how well both candidates insult each other, that's pathos, that's appeal to emotion. That's also not very credible, because when you want to vote for someone, you don't vote for people on how well each other insult each other. You want to vote for somebody based on policy, like what was Hillary Clinton's stand on many different policies? What was candidate Trump's stand on many different policies? We don't make our decisions based on pathos. So if you have an argument that only has pathos, it's illogical, it's a fallacy. If you have an argument that's missing ethos, it's illogical, it's a fallacy. If you have an argument that's missing logos and has no essay structure, it's illogical and it's a fallacy. And so in order for your argument to have full validity, you have to have all three, ethos, pathos, and logos. All three need to be in your argument. And so in your week 9 forum, if you want to challenge yourself, you can look at other people's papers and say to yourself, does Jan's paper, does it have ethos, pathos, and logos? And you could say, yeah, Jan's paper does have ethos, pathos, and logos. Therefore, Jan's paper has no fallacies, is credible, and is a good paper. In other words, we want to strive to write a paper that has no fallacies. We don't want fallacies. Fallacies are things like, there are three kinds of fallacies. Fallacy of relevance, fallacy of ambiguity, and fallacy of presumption. It's the fallacy of presumption that's the one that's most easily understood. Fallacy of presumption is if I were to say, all Chinese people are good at math. In other words, you assume everyone that's Chinese is good at math, or everyone that's Black is not good at math, or everyone that's Hispanic should speak Spanish. Well, not the ones that are raised in America, okay? So that is a fallacy of presumption. It's an illogical argument. And so we want to avoid fallacies in our argument. And when we have a fallacy, it just means that you're missing one of these. You're either missing ethos, pathos, or logos. So you can, if you want, you can, when you peer review other people's papers, you can take a look to see if they have ethos, pathos, logos. And if you choose to do that, you have to explain, well, you know, Jan, you have a lot, you're missing your ethos, which means that you use sources that are not written by experts, okay? So you need to define what is ethos, pathos, logos, because not everybody will be listening to this video, and not everybody will know what ethos, pathos, logos means. So, and it helps people to know that. If you were to tell Jen, you know, you're missing, you shouldn't be using Wikipedia, you need to find other sources, or else Professor H is going to take points off of your paper. So that would be like coaching feedback, you know, of the peer review. So you can stretch yourself if you want to. This is voluntary on your part, is if you want to analyze other people's papers based on ethos, pathos, and logos. And so in the class discussion, what kinds of claims should you make? Debatable or factual? And so we always want to make a debatable claim, because we want to make a claim that people can either agree or disagree on, because that's what makes it interesting. What is the difference between a fact and an opinion? A fact is something that you can double check. An opinion is just something that comes off the top of your head. Like if I were to say, all earthlings descend from Mars, okay? Can you double check that? How do you know that? Okay, so, and that's why you have to back up your opinions with facts. Why are debatable claims important in a persuasive essay? If you make too boring, in other words, when you make a claim of truth, for instance, you have to usually mix it with claim of truth, claim of value, and claim of policy in order to make it interesting. If I were to say Professor H is Chinese American, is that very interesting as a paper? You know, if am I going to write an entire paper about the fact that I'm Chinese American? That is a claim of truth, but it's not interesting. It's not debatable. Okay? You can't debate, is she or is she not Chinese American? Okay, so therefore you want to make a claim like more Chinese Americans or more Asian Americans should be represented in movies, or but other people, that's debatable in that, no, more Hispanic Americans should be in movies. Or somebody might say, no, we should have everybody equally in movies. So that makes it debatable. When you make something debatable, that's what makes your paper interesting. Why is it important to have a good thesis statement? Well, then you have one central idea, and people can focus on that one central idea. And also it means that your paper has logos, okay? Appeal to logic. And what are three kinds of claims? Claim of truth, claim of value, and claim of policy. And the most common claim is the claim of policy, in which you talk about something should or should not be done. Why do we avoid all or nothing extreme claims? Well, that's because of the fallacy of presumption. Not all Chinese people are good at math, and certainly not me, good at math, that is. So how do we gather credible evidence? And so in the week 10 worksheet, I'm going to go over how to use KAPOW. And so in order to gather credible evidence. So let's say I put into the Google search engine, gun control, right? Then you're going to get thousands of hits. Some of the websites are good and some of the websites are not good. How do I know which websites are good to use for my paper and which websites are not good to use for my paper? And so then we use KAPOW. C stands for how current that article is within 10 years. A stands for the author. Is he an expert? P stands for purpose of the article. Was it an ad? Then we don't use the article. Was it from Wikipedia? We don't use the article. Or is it a peer-reviewed article? Then we use the article. O, objective. Is it just somebody's opinion? Or is it a fact that you can double check? And does it talk about both sides, or is it biased? That's a O is for objectivity. W, writing style. That's logos. Does it have logical structure? I'm going to discuss all of this in my week 10 instructor session. So if you don't understand what I just said, then you need to attend my week 10 instructor session. So we use KAPOW to ascertain whether or not a website is valid or not valid, whether or not the evidence is credible or not credible. If the evidence passes the KAPOW test, then it is credible. And so you also can use peer-reviewed articles from your online library. Everything in your online library is credible and passes the KAPOW test. Avoid using Wikipedia because anybody can upload anything to Wikipedia. And other kinds of credible evidence include statistics, tests and experiments, graphics, analogies, expert testimony, analysis, and predictions. Go for quality and variety, not for quantity. That means do not overwhelm the reader with a gazillion statistics. Use pie structure so that you have one in-text citation per paragraph. Make sure your evidence is accurate, complete, concrete, relevant, current, authoritative, that in other words, based on experts, and appealing. That's interesting to readers. That means that your claim is debatable. Do not drown your readers with too many quotes. Use pie structure. Avoid cherry picking your facts because then you end up with half-truths. A half-truth contains part of, but not the whole truth. I'm going to discuss what that is because that's part of cherry picking fallacy. That's when, at news stations, when you watch television, when you watch any news station on TV, they all use cherry picking fallacy. In other words, when you want to tell a balanced story, you want to tell both sides of the story, okay? When you want to be fair, that's why when someone goes on trial for, say, murder or something, you have the defendant has his side of the story, and then you have the prosecutor and the defense. In other words, his pro and con. You always want to have both sides of the story in order to tell that it's objective. Cherry picking means you only stick to one side. In other words, it's biased. And so most TV stations, some TV stations are for Trump. They only talk about what a great president Trump was, and they ignore everything else. Other TV stations talk about what a great president Biden is, and they ignore everything else. A real objective TV station, which does not exist anymore, is when you talk about everything, more rounded. In other words, Trump was Trump everything good and bad, and Biden everything good and bad. Nobody does that anymore because right now everything is about ratings. If you talk about the whole thing, it's boring to the reader, to the viewer. And so these days it's all about ratings. And so you talk about just in one station, wow, what a great president Biden is, and Trump was an awful president. And then you attract a certain audience, or that sort of, it's all about attracting audience. This is why there's so much media bias. So you want to avoid the cherry picking in your essay. And I will go over how you do that by engaging the other side and using a rebuttal and paragraph. Okay, so we're going to go over that later on in this presentation, how you can avoid the cherry picking fallacy. So when you write your essay, you focus on the issue, not the person. So avoid attacking the person. Avoid all or nothing, false dilemma fallacies. So we want to avoid misusing evidence. So cherry picking your facts is misusing evidence, focusing on the person, such as if you were to call the person names rather than focusing on the issue. So that's what happened in the 2016 election. Both candidates focused on attacking each other rather than focusing on the issues. Okay, so it's just like in our peer review forums. We don't attack the student for writing a bad paper. We focus on the paper, not the person. It's the same thing, same idea. And that's known as the ad hominem fallacy. Whenever someone focuses on a person rather than so any kind of fallacy, meaning illogical argument, is something you want to avoid in your paper. Now, the different kinds of evidence that you do want to use is you want to use observations, as scientists or doctors use observations to make a diagnosis. You want to use statistics, using statistics percentages to back up a claim or thesis, using tests and experiments to prove a hypothesis. Analogies, making valid comparison cause effect between several aspects of a topic. Analogy, did I just say that already? Yeah. Expert testimony, basing your facts on experts. Examples, using case studies or other examples to prove your case. Also, the interesting thing about using case studies, it gives a face to your topic. So I remember when they were writing about the refugees, and then they went over one particular refugee. So I'm going to make it up off the top of my head. Ching Yi lived during the 1960s Cultural Revolution. She, the Chinese Cultural Guard at the time, came to her house, forced her out of her house, kicked her out of the house, and Ching Yi had to become a refugee to run away from the cultural guard. Any Chinese person who was educated was captured and forced to work in a field or beaten or killed. And so Ching Yi had to flee to Hong Kong. And then eventually Ching Yi found herself in America, emigrated to America, where she would have freedom to be educated, freedom to say what she wanted. So anyway, I used a case study of Ching Yi as an example of why you want to live in a free society as opposed to, say, communism or something. So when you use a case study, you make your topic come alive. It gives a human face to your topic. So that's an example of different kinds of evidence to back up your topic. Analysis, finding patterns of behavior to make connections to back up your claim. Doing research on a topic to learn more about the topic. So these are all different kinds of evidence that you can use in your paper. And so here we have the class discussion. How do we gather credible evidence? What is the importance of credible evidence? And so here we want to have credible evidence so that our paper is believable. And we want to avoid misusing credible evidence in order to avoid fallacies and illogical arguments. And you have to have, why must your evidence relate to your thesis? So that you have logos. Remember that you want to have ethos, pathos, and logos, all three of them in your paper in order for your argument to be valid. And we use pie structure so we don't drown the reader in 1,000 statistics. What happens if you make claims without credible evidence? That would be like, I think I'm from Mars, and everybody's from Mars, and we're all aliens. So claims without credible evidence become news, gossip, rumor, propaganda, and conspiracy theory. Okay, I can say that NASA is, well, not NASA. I can't think of a good one, but did you know Linda, who is married to the math teacher? Or did you know that John is going out with his somebody else and he's married? His wife is the last to know. And let's say the wife is sitting right in the faculty room on the other side of the room while everybody's whispering, gossiping that John is having an affair. And it's not true, when actually those two people got together for some other reason, like to plan a surprise party for the wife. But these people don't know that because they're engaging in gossip. And so when you make a claim without credible evidence, you can ruin someone's reputation, or you lead people down the wrong path. Okay, so you will always want to have credible evidence, accurate evidence, something that you can double check. Okay, so I came up with the example, humans are all descended from Martian aliens who live inside Mars, because people live inside Mars and they also live inside the moon. Can you prove it? Another example is, I was abducted by aliens. So these are all claims without credible evidence, which become fake news. All Asians are infected with COVID-19 because they have slanty eyes. That's also a claim without credible evidence. So you don't want to make claims without credible evidence, because that leads to, as I said, gossip, rumor, propaganda, and conspiracy theories. And claims without proof or evidence are known as fallacies, which are illogical arguments. And as I mentioned before, there are 3 kinds of fallacies. And you want to avoid fallacies in your paper, okay? In all of this, the reason why we talk about fallacies is this is what you want to avoid in your paper. This is why it's so important to use KAPAO to make sure that your evidence is credible. And so there are 3 kinds of fallacies. That is, there are 3 kinds of illogical arguments: fallacies of relevance, ambiguity, and overgeneralization. Fallacies of relevance occurs when the conclusion of the premise or claim is false, or when you present a claim with false or no evidence. Examples of fallacies of evidence are TV ads, such as 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Dentyne. Which dentists? Who are these dentists? What is the evidence behind this claim? What other TV ads do you know that present false claims like this? And the answer to that is almost all of them, okay? When Prevagen, they say Prevagen is known to improve memory, better brain, better life. Who says? Who's the doctor? Where's the research? Okay, and so that's known as a fallacy of relevance, is when you present a claim with no evidence. That's TV ads, all of them. Fallacies of ambiguity is where the ambiguity in question arises directly from the poor grammatical structure in a sentence. The fallacy occurs when a bad argument relies on the grammatical ambiguity to sound strong and logical. And this is very relevant in slippery slope arguments and in circular arguments. So here's an example of a fallacy of ambiguity. The bark was painful. What bark? Whose bark? Do you mean that the bark is on a tree? You know, in other words, somebody rubbed their back against a tree and then it's painful? Or are you talking about a dog barking and then it hurts the listener's ears? What do you mean by the bark was painful? So that is a fallacy of ambiguity. Fallacies of overgeneralization. Now, the fallacy of overgeneralization is the same thing as the fallacy of presumption. So the hasty generalization fallacy, fallacy of presumption, overgeneralization fallacy. This is making a claim based on evidence that is just too small. Essentially, you can't make a claim and say that something is true if you have only one example or two. So you overgeneralize. So Kevin's grandparents do not know how to use a computer. Kevin thinks all older people must be computer illiterate. And so let's say I only know in all of my friends one Chinese person. That one Chinese person is good at math. Therefore, I assume all Chinese people must be good at math. That's when you make a fallacy of overgeneralization. Or if one Hispanic person, you know, only one Hispanic person, and she speaks Spanish, then you think, oh, that must mean all Hispanic people speak Spanish. That sort of thing. So when you overgeneralize, that also occurs with racism. When you think a certain race that are all violent, or a certain race is inferior, or a certain race is just not smart, okay? And you overgeneralize based on one or two people, okay? That's also known as fallacies of overgeneralization. A lot of racism comes from hasty generalization fallacy, overgeneralization fallacy, and fallacies of presumption. All means the same things when you base your claim on false evidence. Okay, that is fallacy that you want to avoid in your paper. That's why it's so important that you use credible evidence that is accurate. Cherry picking fallacy or bias. So this is most apparent, as I mentioned before, in media bias. A cherry picking fallacy occurs when you present only one side of an argument, which results in bias. To have a balanced argument, you need to present both sides of an argument in order for the argument to be balanced and fair. Example, Fox News presents only how President Biden makes mistakes, but never presents President Biden's accomplishments. This is known as media bias. And so what is a fallacy? A fallacy is an illogical argument. What is a fallacy of relevance? That's when you make a claim with no evidence. And TV ads, that's where you see most of those, fallacy of relevance. What is a fallacy of ambiguity? That's when you make grammar mistakes and then it's not clear what you're talking about. What is a fallacy of overgeneralization? That's when you base a claim on a false evidence, such as saying oh, you know, one Chinese person is good at math, so that must mean all Chinese people are good at math. So what kind of fallacy are TV ads? I just went over that one. I'll let you decide that for yourself. I'm not going to answer that one, although the answer is right on this page. All right, so how do we make sure that our arguments are fair? We want to engage the opposition. Engaging the opposition means you make concessions to the other side by admitting that certain aspects of the topic on the other side is correct. Think of an argument as a lively debate. Anticipate the reader's questions, concerns, objections, and counter-arguments about your topic. By making concessions, you recognize points scored by the other side. You strengthen your argument by being able to rebut the other side. When you concede and rebut the other side, your argument becomes more credible. How to make concessions? Words that indicate that you are letting the other side into your argument. So that means basically what you do is you talk about little bits and pieces of what the other side thinks, and then you rebut and say, oh, no, 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 you're wrong because. I'll give you an example. Most teenagers think that, so if my thesis statement is vaping is dangerous, what's the other side of that? The other side of that argument, vaping is not dangerous, right? So we're going to mention, admittedly, or it is, you can use any of these words, admittedly, it is true that, granted, I concede that, or I agree that. I agree that. You start your sentence with any of these. It is true that vaping has many different flavors. I agree. These flavors taste wonderful. Okay. Granted, if you vape in front of your friends, you do look sophisticated. Okay. No doubt that if you vape, you look cool. You look glamorous. Same thing with smoking. Okay. I cannot argue with the fact that when I see a celebrity smoke, I want to smoke also. That's all concessions to the other side. In other words, you're agreeing with certain aspects of the other side's argument. Yes, vaping does taste good. Yes, I agree. If you vape, you look real glamorous. Then you talk about your point of view, rebuttal. However, okay, vaping is dangerous because it causes cancer. That's how we rebut the other side. That's how you have a fair argument. It's, you do agree with certain aspects of the other side. However, and then your argument. That's how we create a valid argument that is fair and balanced. And you can also use that style as your in your introduction paragraph. That's known as a turnabout introduction paragraph. And I mentioned that in my PowerPoint video called Different Kinds of Introduction Paragraphs. I think I different kinds of conclusion paragraphs and different kinds of, and I think it was a PowerPoint as different kinds of introduction paragraphs. And I did post that into your announcement. So if you've been a faithful viewer of all of my videos, then this topic should be, this how to make concessions topic should be familiar to you. If not, then you can, if this is not familiar to you, you can always go back to the announcements and look for that PowerPoint to watch it for yourself. So here are some more examples of concessions. As a Republican, I concede that the January 6th riots were wild and disruptive. However, I rebut that the people who stormed the Capitol were patriots, demanding Trump to be the rightful president of the United States. Granted, smoking may look glamorous. However, smoking is dangerous to your health. Admittedly, smoking may look glamorous and mature. However, so here you have granted, admittedly, I concede. So you can use those words to start your what you agree with to the other side. And then you can use pivot and use however, or any other transition word of opposition. I suggest you get a transition word list so that you don't keep using however, because there are a lot of transition word of opposition that you can use. Granted, smoking may look glamorous. On the other hand, see, that's another transition word of opposition. So so you can Google that, and there's a whole list of that. So anyway, you talk about the other side, and then you pivot over to your side. That's how you make your argument look balanced. Even when you concede a point, you can often answer the objection by rebutting it. So when I say rebuttal, that's when you go, however, smoking is bad for your health. That's known as a rebuttal. Whatever comes after the however is a rebuttal, because you're answering to the other side. You're answering to you're directing your answer to the weak spot in the opposing argument. Point out, so when you rebut the other side, point out the other side's limits or weaknesses. Tell the other side of the story. Address logical fallacies in the counter argument. In other words, well, however, vaping is dangerous because it causes all of these cancers. Then you could use a case study. Jan started vaping when she was 14. And now Jan has cancer and has to breathe through a ventilator. Okay, so now you're telling the other side of the story, and you're addressing the logical fallacies in the others on the other side. Yeah, it does look glamorous, but is it worth it to look glamorous when you're just going to get sick later on? That is a claim of value. Okay, both a claim of value and a claim of truth. Is it worth it? That's a claim of value and ethics, and it's not worth it just to look good. Here are other ways of rebuttals. So instead of saying, however, you could say, some say that, opponents say that, many people claim that, those who disagree believe that. And so when we write our, let's see, many believe that vaping looks glamorous. However, vaping is dangerous. Some opponents say that vaping looks glamorous. However, vaping is dangerous. That sort of thing. In many of the early Barack Obama speeches, Obama uses concession and common ground to instill hope in the American people for positive change. Listen to the early Obama speeches for examples of how Obama expertly uses the concession rebuttal style of writing and speech. And so typically, Obama would say, I agree with the Republicans that as Americans, we all want a united country. We all want liberty and independence. We all want equality for all. But I want more because in my administration, he would say, I will institute positive change and I will prevent gridlock in the American government. And so then he pivots over to his point of view and he differentiates himself from the rest of the pack, the other candidates. And as a Democrat, I promise you I will pass this bill, that bill, this bill, that sort of. So you talk about the other side, the Republicans, and Obama being a Democrat will then pivot over. However, So you see that in the early 2008, Obama was very polite. And then by the time Obama got to 2012, his argumentative style became a lot more confrontational. And that became something known as Toolman versus Rogerian. And so he was more Rogerian. I'll go over that in a different PowerPoint, but he became a lot more confrontational later on. And that's a different kind of a less polite way, but still the most traditional way of debate. Okay, here's an example of the other side. Granted, some say that using lectures in class is boring and monotonous. Having only the teacher speak for hours on end and not have any student activity is not really interesting for students and lowers student attention and learning. Teacher lectures are seen as an outmoded, teacher-centered form of education. Many teachers see lectures as not an interesting way to motivate student learning. Instead, they prefer a student-centered here instead. So now I'm pivoting. over. So instead of saying however, okay, so now I'm pivoting over into my thesis statement. However, teachers prefer, or I prefer, a more student-centered classroom where students are active and lectures are eliminated from the curriculum. Okay, so I pivoted. In other words, some people think that lectures are just boring, and some people think, so here you have one side and then you pivot over to the other side. I disagree. So here, oh, okay, hold on. I think I did that wrong. Let's see, let me go back. Oh, here. Isn't that cool how it comes back like that? All right, so here's an example of a counter-argument paragraph in which you say that lectures are boring, okay? And this is how a lot of people in teaching think, is that lectures are boring and monotonous. However, I disagree. I think that lectures are not boring and monotonous. Instead, I think that lectures are a vital part of teaching and help students gain mastery of the idea. So you can write an entire paragraph on the other side and then write an entire paragraph about how you feel. If you decide to write a counter-argument and rebuttal paragraph rather than just a counter-argument and rebuttal introduction, you can write that in your body paragraphs. Okay, after you write your, and this is a more, this goes beyond the 5-paragraph essay structure that you are required to learn in this class. So if you want to challenge yourself to a more sophisticated way to write a persuasive essay, after you write your 3 basic essays, 3 basic body paragraphs. So let's say you said smoking or gun control is not necessary because reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. After you write your 3 body paragraphs, then you can add in counter-argument paragraph and a rebuttal paragraph. Okay, this is not required, but if you want a more sophisticated style of writing that goes beyond the 5-paragraph essay structure, then you can do this paragraph, counter-argument paragraph, and rebuttal paragraph. So it's totally up to you if you're up to the challenge. So here I would say, I disagree with the claim that lectures are outmoded and boring. On the contrary, according to the book Dynamic Lectures, teaching by lecture is a vital part of teaching because lectures provide foundational knowledge for students on unfamiliar topics. Students gain mastery of the topic faster when a teacher lectures, and also lectures provide a faster way for teachers to teach the content of the class. After all, there are many ways to give a dynamic lecture through humor, multimedia, and having an animated, passionate presentation. So why do we engage the opposition? We engage the opposition to avoid the cherry-picking fallacy, to avoid having media bias. What is a concession? Concession is when you talk about what you agree with about the other side. How does a concession strengthen my argument? After you talk down the other side, it makes your argument look stronger. A counter argument is how the other side thinks. Okay, counter argument. In other words, it's the opposite of what you think. So if you think that smoking is dangerous, then the other side or the counter argument is smoking is not dangerous. And counter arguments and rebuttals are used in court cases all the time. And make sure that you use ethos, and I mentioned this before, make sure you use ethos, pathos, and logos in your paper so that you have a valid argument. For ethos builds credibility. In other words, ethos means that it's written by experts, so that makes your paper more believable and makes the reader trust you because you use sources not from Wikipedia. Appeal to logic, logos. You engage readers positively. Use a fitting tone. Don't use you and your. Aim to motivate, not manipulate readers. Don't trash talk the opposition. Have a thesis with matching body paragraphs. That's logos, appeal to logic. Pathos, appeal to emotion. Focus on your readers' needs. Picture your readers as resistant to your ideas. Use appeals that match the needs of your readers. Be aware of your audience. So when we use pathos, okay, so here are some ways in which we can use, and also something to mention is ethos, pathos, and logos were created by Aristotle, going back all the way to ancient Greece. So that's how old ethos, pathos, so you can look it up, ethos, pathos, logos, and there's a gazillion PowerPoints. And I actually did create a PowerPoint about ethos, pathos, and logos. If you're interested, I can email it to you. So using pathos to make the world better by appealing to values and social obligations. Do something good for someone or for recognition, self-fulfillment, status, and appreciation. Being part of a group identity, acceptance, and belonging. Avoiding threats, safety, security, and physical needs. Examples of ethos, pathos, and logos. If I, an English teacher, were to tell you what it's like to work as a nurse without ever having been a nurse, would you believe me? That's an example of ethos, okay? You want an expert. If an article does not have logical structure and it's filled with grammar errors, then that means the logos is not quite right. So all of these are all examples of ethos, pathos, logos used the wrong way. If someone uses fear or fear-mongering to try to persuade you of a topic, then that means that's overuse of pathos. That's also wrong. And then this is why you need to have a persuasive argument in which ethos has expert testimony, pathos has excellent descriptive language, and logos has good essay structure. And so why is it important to have ethos, pathos, and logos? Then you can avoid all illogical arguments and fallacies. So now I'm going to go into the last portion of my persuasive essay presentation, where I'm going to talk about the 3 kinds of persuasive essays. There are 3 kinds of persuasive essays. The position paper, which is the most common that I see in the claims of policy. In other words, you take a side. What is your position? You take a side of what position. In other words, are you for or against the topic? Okay, and then you would say, I am for the topic because, or I am against the topic because. So when you take a position on a paper, and then you want to convince the reader your point of view, that's the most elementary kind of persuasive paper known as a position paper. Second kind of paper is known as a call to action paper. That's when you are like an activist, and then you want to persuade the public to take action against usually a social injustice or a cause. That's the second kind of persuasive action, a persuasive paper. Third kind of persuasive paper is the problem solution paper, where you talk about the problem and then you talk about the solution. So those are the 3 kinds of persuasive papers. And that's the last part of my presentation, where I'm going to talk about and give examples of the 3 kinds of persuasive essays. So first I'm going to cover what is a position paper. A position paper is when you take a stand on an issue and you write a position paper that clearly states what side you are on and you clearly state what you believe in. Most position papers aim to educate and inform the reader and persuade the reader to your side of an issue. The topics addressed in position papers are debatable issues. Your argument must be informative, logical, and engaging. Ethos, pathos, logos. Are you for or against an issue? What are the benefits and disadvantages of an issue? Is the issue moral or immoral? Examples of position paper topics. In the Chippewa Indian tribe, women are the stronger gender and they are the leaders of the tribe. Nuclear power is not the answer for our energy needs because the risks outweigh the benefits. Climate change is not a hoax. Gun control is unnecessary if you properly train people how to use a gun. More examples of position papers in the real world. When a political candidate runs for president, he would give the American people his position paper on many issues, such as immigration, economy, or foreign affairs. And these position papers are usually found on the candidate's official website. So if you're going to vote for someone and you want to wonder, what does this candidate stand for? Then you would go to that candidate's official website and look at the candidate's position papers. So Hillary Clinton had a official website. You could look up her position. Trump also had has a website, official website with his position papers. And Biden, everybody, all the politicians. So that is, and so when you read a candidate's website and their position on immigration, economy, or foreign affairs, you are actually reading official government examples of position paper persuasive essays. And when we vote for the president, we vote for the issues, not the person. And here's something that came from President Biden's position paper. This I got directly from President Biden's official website. And this is President Biden's position on COVID-19. Now, the second kind of persuasive paper is the call to action persuasive paper. And here you would have, let's say, a social injustice. You write a paper that's so effective that you get your reader to come off his couch and they go to a protest, for instance, or they write a letter to the senator saying such and such a topic, that's unjust and I want to fix it, okay? So the call to action paper leads to the problem solution paper, okay? So each kind of persuasive essay paper becomes more and more strong, more and more serious. So here is an example of the call to action. After you convince the reader of your point of view, that your point of view is the best one, then you persuade the reader to act. Okay, so in your position paper, so you would persuade the reader to act on your topic. So a call to action persuasive writing occurs in newsletters, editorials, marketing, business communication. In other words, you want the reader remember I mentioned call to action in which the conclusion paragraph in a business letter is a call to action conclusion, not just a summary conclusion. In other words, you want the reader to go out and buy your product. You want the reader to come and do business in your business. And so that is usually what business communication is all about, a call to action for the reader to do business with your business, call to action. And so in science writing, a call to action is when you have done your experiment and it works, you have a new treatment or cure for a disease. So the call to action is for everybody to get the vaccine. So in science writing, it's for everybody to get a vaccine or the cure or the treatment. In business writing, the call to action is for everyone to come and do business with your business or buy your product. And in persuasive writing, mainly used for social justice, it means that everyone goes out and protests for or against some social injustice. And so that's why persuasive writing in general is in everything we do, everywhere we go, from business writing to science writing to, that's why call to action occurs in newsletters, editorials, marketing, ads, the TV ads, business proposals, academic journals, white papers. White papers are those political position papers on the websites of the candidates. If you go to any candidate like Hillary Clinton or President Trump or President Biden or President Obama, anybody, they all have position papers, white papers. Writers call for action because they believe change is necessary to fix a problem or correct an injustice. The writer's goal is to get the reader to care so much about this topic that they will act on it to fix the issue. In academics, call to action issues would be to expand the art department, create a mentoring program, or a political or social issue, shelter for abused women, or help people in a crisis, such as a hurricane, epidemic, or war. Good call to action arguments. So in order to write a good call to action paper, you need to have a compelling argument, you need to have logical argument, and you need to have a mature voice. So the writer, in a compelling argument, the writer accurately describes the issue, convinces the reader of its importance, and calls for action. In a logical argument, the argument is based on reliable information, such as expert testimony, tests, and experiments, and also a mature voice. And I chose as an example of a call to action, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." That, to me, is the most perfect call to action, social injustice speech written in the 20th century. So here are the words of Martin Luther King, call to action essay. And he's talking on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration in freedom for the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later. And so he's talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, which occurred in 1865. And as you remember, the I Have a Dream speech occurred in 1965. So this is Martin Luther King, as you all know, in 1965. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent Constitution and Declaration of Independence, we were signing a promissory note to which every American would have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has not given the Negroes his happiness or his unalienable rights. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. It would be fatal to the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. The sweltering summer of the Negro legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content and will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will neither be rest nor tranquility until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something I must say to my people who stand on the threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining your rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people, for many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, and they have come to realize that their freedom is bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who ask, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We cannot be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger ghetto. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood, of their dignity, by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. This is my favorite part of it. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and to the true meaning of its creed, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And if you want to hear the actual speech, you can go to this website, and he says it much better than what I just said. And then the last kind of persuasive essay is the problem solution example paper. And it's very similar. When you use the problem solution example paper, which is the similar to the block method, which you use in your comparison contrast paper. And also remember, when I talked about the problem solution paper, that's used in business proposals and also used in research proposals, in which you state the problem, the research problem, and then you state the solution. And in the business proposal, you state the business problem, and then you state the solution, which is to hire me to build. Okay, so I did this. I used this example in my business communication lecture, and I also used this example in my how to write a science paper in week 11 lecture, in which I state the problem. In this case, is the company has a parking lot that's too small, and everybody has to park on the streets. And the customers are really angry because they can't park their car, so they don't go to the stores, which equals less business. So then the bosses decide, let's build a bigger parking space. And so I'm a contractor and I approach the business and I say, okay, you're going to hire me to build the bigger parking lot because my company can build you a bigger parking lot for less money than all the others. So here when I write the proposal as the contractor, I state the problem of you guys have a small parking lot. That's the problem. Solution. My company will build you a cheap, but well-efficient, bigger parking lot that will attract business. So that is a problem solution paper for business. And then for science, the problem would be COVID-19 is killing all these people. Solution, we need to develop some kind of vaccine that will cure that variant of COVID-19. So that a problem solution used in medicine, that is a problem solution paper, as well as a problem solution used in business. So in a problem solution in paper, in this kind of persuasive paper, first you write down what the problem is, and then you propose a solution to the problem. Problem solution papers or proposals are prescriptions for change. As such, they challenge the reader not just to care about a problem or just act upon a problem, such as a call to action paper, but to actually solve the problem. Proposal writers argue for remedies in all areas of life, from academia to social justice issues. You may write proposals to justify expenditures, sell products, or troubleshoot problems. In each situation, you clearly define the problem, offer a solution, and explain how to implement it. So here's so problem solution essays. Consider the problems of a particular situation and give solutions to those problems. They are in some ways similar to cause and effect essays, especially in terms of structure. So problem solution essays, which is the third kind of persuasive essay, are actually a subtype of a persuasive essay. And a problem solution persuasive essay has four components. It has you state the situation, you state the problem, you state the solution, and you give an evaluation. So the situation, small parking lot. So that becomes the small parking lot and no business. Solution and evaluation. You're going to build a big parking lot and you're going to have better business. So that's the problem solution paper. So here's an example of a problem solution of a problem. Consumption of processed and convenience foods and our dependence on the car have led to an increase in obesity and reduction in the fitness level of the adult population. In some countries, especially industrialized ones, the number of obese people can amount to 1/3 of the population. This is significant as obesity and poor fitness lead to a decrease in life expectancy, and it is therefore important for individuals and governments to work together to tackle this issue. In other words, everyone's gotten fat because we sit around too much, or we ride in our car, we sit in front of our computer, and everyone's getting fat, and that's not good for our bodies. That's the situation. And when everyone gets fat, that becomes a problem, okay? Because then you have many problems, such as you get heart attacks, you are too heavy, you can't exercise, you feel sick, you feel tired, you get diabetes, you get heart disease, and premature death. And it is well known that regular exercise can reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke, which means that those with poor fitness levels are at an increased risk of suffering from these problems. So that means that so the situation is everyone's gotten fat, problem, everybody's getting sick and living shorter lives. So how do we solve, what's the solution to everyone being fat and not exercising? Well, obviously then the solution is changes by individuals to their diet and the physical activity can increase life expectancy. There is a reliance today on the consumption of processed foods, which has a high fat and sugar content. So that means that you need to do more exercise, eat less junk food, eat less high fat foods, eat more vegetables, eat more fruits and vegetables, do more exercise, get more fit, and you get less fat and get less sick. And also go take the stairs instead of the elevator. That's the solution to getting everybody not fat. So you would spend half your paper talking about the problem, and then the other half of your paper talking about the solution. And then more solutions. Governments should also implement initiatives to improve citizen eating and exercise habits. This could be done through education, by adding gym classes, by encouraging citizens to walk or cycle instead of taking a car, by building more bicycle lanes and increasing vehicle taxes. While some might argue that increased taxes are a negative way to solve the problem, it is no different from the high taxes imposed on cigarettes to reduce cigarette consumption. And so here are the two structures in which you can use to write your problem solution paper. So you write your introduction, problem 1, problem 2, then you can write solution 1, solution 2. So that is the block method. Or you can write the alternate method where you write the problem, the solution, the problem, the solution, problem, solution, and then the conclusion. And so in order to have a good problem solution paper, you need to have an accurate description, you need to have thorough analysis, and you need to have a rational argument. Here are some sample topics for problem solution papers. Okay, so before the other topics were about getting fit. Here you have DACA and rising anti-Asian violence against Asian Americans linked to COVID-19. People blame Asian Americans for the virus and think all Asian Americans have the virus and brought the virus with them from China. So that's the problem. So the problem is because of COVID-19 originated in China, so a lot of people think that if you're Chinese or Asian American, it's your fault that there's COVID-19. And so there's a lot of anti-Asian violence going on. And so that's the problem. And then the solution is that Biden signed into law the Anti-Asian Violence Act, making anti-Asian violence a federal hate crime. So here you have an example of a problem solution topic. Okay, and then you have, as the earth keeps warming due to human activity, there will be more extreme weather, such as more droughts and floods. Cities by the shores will go underwater. Hurricanes will become stronger and cause housing damage and flooding. Drought will cause water reservoirs to dry out, causing water shortage. And so here, the problem is everything's getting too hot. And so the water levels are rising, causing more floods. And also the water is getting warmer. And as the temperatures get warmer, we have more floods, more hurricanes, more wildfires. So that's the problem, is climate change. And then the solution is we need to invest in more sustainable energy, use less fossil fuels, eliminate gases such as refrigerant gases, as well as lessen our carbon footprint to control climate change. And so here you need to, so President Biden's administration priority is to stop climate change. And so Biden signed us up again with the Paris Accord. And so here is also something related to climate change, is every refrigerator and air conditioner contains, in other words, releases heat. So every time you turn on your air conditioner and the cold air goes into your house, but then the hot air goes outside of your house, that causes everything to get warmer, and that's climate change. And the solution is that everybody in the world has to agree to lowering their carbon imprint in order for, in other words, to use less coal, for instance, and to phase out HFCs. I think that's a kind of refrigerant that warms the air that comes out of your air conditioner and your refrigerator. Same thing with wind turbines. And so what are the three types of persuasive papers? You have the position paper, you have the call to action paper, and you have the problem solution. So those are the three types of persuasive papers. A position paper is when you simply take a position on a paper, on a topic. A call to action paper is when you you care so much about a topic that you go protest about it. And then a problem solution paper is you care so much about a topic, you solve the topic. So in conclusion, having the skill to persuade people allows you to be successful at work, in your personal life, and also to help society. If you can make a valid argument with no fallacies and with ethos, credibility, pathos, care, and logos, competency, then you can get your way and be persuasive and be a successful person. So this is the end of this, this is the end of this essay. And so I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. I know it was way too long, so that's why I had to click through certain other topics in order to get to the very end, because I talked too much about the beginning. I tend to talk too much in the beginning and then have to rush through the end. I don't know if you noticed that in almost all my lectures, is that I have to rush through the end, because as I look at the clock and I go, oh shoot, it's like an hour and a half has gone by and people have long ago fallen asleep. And so that's why. So I apologize if this was way too long, but it is always important to be able to write a really good persuasive paper. And I hope that this helps you in writing your persuasive post in your week 9 forum. And it gives you an idea of how many different kinds and how pervasive and how common persuasive essays are in society, because it's everywhere. Okay. So if you have any questions, and also happy holidays and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And if you have any questions, only 3 more weeks left to this class. And remember, December 23rd is the last day of this class. Okay. And it's on a Thursday. Okay. So I know that you're used to handing everything in on Sunday, but for the last week of December, or for the last week of this class, you have to remember that Thursday, December 23rd, is going to be the last day of your class. And you have to hand everything in by that time. Otherwise, all zeros become permanent. And so after this lecture, I have 3 more lectures to go. And I think the last lecture is going to be a pre-recorded one, because that's going to be Christmas week. So 2 more live lectures left. Okay. So only 2 more of my boring live lectures left for you to suffer through. So if you have any more questions, feel free to email me. And I hope to see you next week, because that's the week 10 credible sources worksheet that many students have trouble with. So happy holidays.